Is the BlueCo family just about to get a little bit bigger? Welcome, Blue Believers, to another episode of the Stamford Sync, where we are syncing up with everything Chelsea FC. And today, that means we're going to dive back into the multi-club model and the latest news surrounding Chelsea's propensity for expanding their footballing empire beyond the oceans and into other places in order to grow our network of footballing connections and, get into new markets and be able to look at new young talent and ultimately be able to kind of hoard more talent in general than we already do. But guys, before we get into it, if you're enjoying the content and would like to see more, please do me the distinct honour of liking and sharing the video, subscribe to the channel, or just roast me in the comments, whatever gets you through your day. Oh, and guys, I've recently been made aware, apparently there's a new feature on YouTube called the hype button. Guys, if you can see this button right now, give it a click, because that apparently directly can put me in front of more people, and if you're up for it, I would really, really appreciate it. Right, so, multi-club model. Now, it's Santos in Brazil, right? Which is really, really interesting for a myriad reasons, truth be told. Santos is a legendary club. That's where Neymar came from. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, Brazilian clubs in general have produced historically lots and lots of really good talent. And Chelsea have had conversations, right? So we're not like making bids or like nothing official yet, but this looks like a place that they'd really like to go. We are looking at investing in Santos in order to bring them into the BlueCo family, along with our current sister club in France, Strasbourg. So the most recent conversations that we had around expanding the multi-club model seem to be lingering around Sporting of Portugal, right? And it almost looked like we were doing some of the groundwork for that, didn't it? Because obviously we went in there and got Dario Asugo, and we paid a lot of money for Giovanni Quenda, but we loaned them back. Asugo was for the rest of the season that we bought him, and Quenda is going to be there for the rest of this season, although apparently he's not playing very much, and Chelsea aren't happy, or BlueCo aren't happy about that. But the thing with Sporting is really, really good, production for talent, 100%, loads of really good, you've only got to look at, Bruno Fernandes and Victor Gyökeres, and even look at Giovanni Quenda, obviously Cristiano Ronaldo, like loads of really good players that come out of Sporting. I think, though, maybe one of the issues that they're considering is the Champions League implications. It is not impossible. I did a video on this a little while ago, figuring out the whole multi-club model, how you can both be in the same competitions and stuff. It is not impossible for clubs owned in part by the same ownerships to be able to compete in the same competitions together, but it does mean that you've got to get in there quite a long time before the season ends to say, if this club qualifies for the Champions League, we will not have any involvement in it. And ultimately, that means that you can't loan many players. You can't have any sort of say in what goes on. You have to hand over the control of that club to another entity for the season that you're in the same competition for them. So, imagine, for instance, just to summarise it, if Strasbourg and we had Sporting Lisbon and they all got in the Champions League in a season, we wouldn't be able to use those multi-club model partnerships to our advantage as we currently are. Obviously, Strasbourg have got loads of Chelsea players. Just this season, we transferred 4 different players there. 3 went on, actually, technically 5. 5 different players got transferred to Strasbourg this season, 3 of which were on loan, 2 of which were sales. One of those is Ishe Samuel-Smith, who's now actually gone on loan to Swansea. No, 6, because it's Ben Chilwell as well. So there's 3 permanent transfers and 3 loan deals we have sent to Strasbourg this season. You wouldn't be able to do anything like that if you're all in the Champions League together, right? So although it's cool to have lots of, competing clubs in the Champions League and stuff, ultimately, as far as BlueCo will look at it, that will remove the option to use them as like a multi-club model for loaning out players and developing players. And, it kind of like puts a bit of a cap on what you can actually do with them. So Sporting Lisbon are no strangers to the Champions League, right? So it definitely would have made things a little bit tricky. If and what's the point? Do you know what I mean? If like you've got a club that is constantly in the Champions League and you can't transfer players between them, they're probably thinking about that and being like, oh, okay, well, actually, Sporting's a great club, but they do produce a lot of talent. But because they feature in the Champions League so often, we wouldn't actually be able to do much in the way of transfers. I think there's literally a limit of like 2 or it might even be 2 players per season that you're allowed to transfer if you have this like embargo saying that you're not involved in that club. So it would really limit what you could do as far as having a multi-club model goes. So this is why Santos becomes interesting, right? Because Santos, not in Europe. Santos can't play in the Champions League. So you would be able to willy-nilly send players back and forth, right? So that is one benefit of it. There's a couple of potential benefits. I am speculating largely about this, by the way. I've done a bit of research and stuff as well, but largely I'm just trying to think, like, what would you do with the Santos if you had them? You've got to think, right, at the base of it, what they probably want to do is create another 10 Esteval Williams, essentially, because what they'd be able to do then is be one of the big financial powers in the Brazilian league. And if there was a player from Palmeiras, or there was a player from Fluminense, or there was a player from Grêmio or something like that, do you know what I mean? Then all of a sudden, if, imagine like a 16, 17-year-old who's kind of coming up, then Santos would be able to use BlueCo's financial muscle to be like, we'll have that player, and then they can still play in that league, or they can come to us, or they can go to Strasbourg or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It does just kind of make sense. So I think creating an army of Esteval Williams is essentially the goal there, because there's a lot of really good talent that comes out of the Brazilian league. The other difference with the Brazilian league and the European leagues, right, is young players are more likely to do well because they don't have like academy teams over there. Do you know what I mean? The same way we do. We've got like the Premier League 2 and academy teams or whatever. And ultimately, our academy, look at the difference, for instance, between Tyreek George and Esteval Willian. And Tyreek George is a year older. Tyreek George is a very good technical footballer, but because he spent most of his time playing academy football, he hasn't been able to mentally and physically acclimatise to the rigours that is Premier League football, playing against fully grown men with lots of pressure to win actual leagues and not just academy stuff. So physically, obviously, there's the difference because it's kids playing against kids, and mentally there's the difference because there's nothing really on the line. Do you know what I mean? No one's going, oh my God, we won the under 21s league this year or whatever. It's not really got that same sort of pressure on it, has it? But when you're an Esteval Willian at 16, 17 years old playing, I think Flamengo is actually where he started. He started at another team. Excuse me. He started at another team and then moved over to Palmeiras, which is, it was Palmeiras that he played for. He was playing first team football against full grown men playing football. Do you know what I mean? So he's had a lot more experience. Although the quality of the league is lower than the Premier League or something, obviously that's true. What isn't different is the mentality, because you've got real titles on the line, and the physical element of it, playing against fully grown players, do you know what I mean, who aren't gonna, take into, he's like, oh, he's a kid, I'll go easy on him. It's like, nah, man, they want to win the game and they want to get 3 points. So one of the reasons why your players like your Neymar's when he was really young and your Esteval Williams can come out of an environment like that with a really strong footballing mentality is because they've been playing proper football. Do you know what I mean? There's no like, oh, protect them because they're kids or whatever. It's no, they're throwing them in the deep end, kind of. And yes, like I say, albeit in a lower standard of overall football, but for a 17, 18-year-old, like, that's heavy, man. That's heavy. So yeah, I just, that might be something that Chelsea are interested in, because there's this thing with South American footballers, isn't it? Like, they learn on the streets and stuff. And ultimately, if a kid from South America learns on the streets and gets good, then what he does is goes into a first team and, do you know what I mean, plays proper football. Makes a real difference. So it could also be a case of like, maybe some of our better academy talents can get loaned or sold to somewhere like Santos and try and experience proper first team football, because we try it sometimes, like we send him to the championship and, do you know what I mean, some stuff like that, but what happens a lot of the time is they don't get game time. Do you know what I mean? Occasionally you get a Reece James, who was the player of the season at Wigan when he was in the championship. Do you know what I mean? Absolutely unbelievable. But it doesn't always work like that, man. And there was obviously Mason Mount at Derby, and, do you know what I mean, it does happen sometime. And if anything, that's kind of what I'm saying. I know Mason Mount's fallen off a little bit, but these players that get the opportunity to play proper first team football at a very young age often kind of really jump up a bit quicker, don't they? So maybe the Santos thing is, yes, let's create a myriad amount of Esteval Williams, and maybe let's also try and find opportunities for our younger players to play in a league that is a bit less quality, like you would argue, probably not the top teams, because the top teams in Brazil are really good, but the league standard in general is probably a bit weaker than it is in France, for instance. Do you know what I mean? So obviously we tried issue Samuel Smith over there. That is something that we're looking at. We've sent a lot of youngsters to Strasbourg. That's absolutely true. But maybe that idea of, getting some of that street smarts for our academy players, and not all of them, but really young talents like a Reggie Walsh at 17, 18. If he's not ready to break into the team, then maybe we can send him to a Santos and he can go and play some proper football. You got to think as well, because if you look at Strasbourg, Liam Rosinia was kind of posted there by BlueCo. Do you know what I mean? I think they had one manager for the first season, and then they got Liam Rosinia in. So Liam Rosinia is a BlueCo manager. Do you know what I mean? He has been chosen by BlueCo to be that guy as well. And obviously look at all of the Chelsea coded players that you've got over there. And the same thing could maybe happen with Santos. Like I say, it's very interesting as well, just because they wouldn't be tied to the Champions League stuff. So you'd have a lot more freedom in terms of even if Santos were really successful in their own right and they won their league title and, they getting into their, the South American version of the Champions League, for instance, sorry, I can't remember what it's called. That's only really good then. There's no negative for Chelsea in that respect. So yes, and I've talked about this in the other video as well. As a Chelsea fan, I love all of this, and I think it's cool because they are looking for really creative and interesting ways to circumvent what ultimately is limits on the loan system. Look at what's happened with us now. We're stuck with Axel Disasi because we used our last international loan spot to send Jackson to Bayern Munich. Do you know what I mean? So what's happening now is Disasi's on our books. He's come out and said he wants to play, by the way. He's like, oh no, I'll stick around. I'll try and find my way back into the team. That's another little bit of news. But aside from that, we are now stuck with Axel Disasi because he couldn't get a loan to Monaco, which is what they wanted and what he wanted. But we used our last international loan spot, which is only 6. Do you know what I mean? You get 6 international loan spots for your whole team in a whole season. That's not very many, man. So, somewhere like Santos, I mean, maybe we don't do as many loans. Maybe it is sales and stuff. But ultimately, that's another club that you can start sending players to. I doubt we'd use it to do stuff like we've done with sending Ben Chilwell to Strasbourg, because obviously the finances are overall going to be a bit lower. And I wouldn't have thought that sort of thing's going to happen unless the players are South American, because South American players do often like to go back to Brazil towards the end of their careers. Like Thiago Silva, for instance, went to Fluminense, didn't he, at the end of his career, because that's kind of where he came from, and they do love that. There was the whole thing with Messi said he always wanted to go back to Newell Old Boys in Argentina at the end of his career, and I think Sergio Aguero and Carlos Tevez, they all wanted to do similar sort of thing, didn't they? So there is some other, maybe some, if we have some South American players who start getting towards the end of their career, maybe that becomes an option as well. And it's like, yeah, cool, I'll go to Santos because it's in Brazil and I want to go back there. So there's really lots of smart, interesting reasons why going in for a Santos is maybe smarter than trying to get someone like Sporting Lisbon, who are maybe a little bit too high profile. Do you know what I mean? If you look at Strasbourg weren't a high profile team. And initially we went in for Olympic Lyon. Do you know what I mean? And obviously that didn't end up happening. But I actually think going for the lower team is smarter as far as the multi-club model goes. And if it's a European team, that can still cause problems, because Strasbourg nearly got into the Champions League last year. Do you know what I mean? And they kind of just missed out. But at the end of the day, I think they're in the Conference League now. But if they would have got into the Champions League, then we wouldn't have been able to send 6 players over to Strasbourg this season, because we'd have had to have declared it before the end of the season last year and been like, Strasbourg are going to be in the Champions League. We are giving control of the club to this person, this intermediary, for the rest of the season. So, guys, tell me what you think. I've been rambling about this one for a little while. I happen to find all of this stuff really, really interesting and fascinating. I love the idea of growing the club in a certain way. Caveat, as long as it doesn't affect the fan culture. Do you know what I mean? There were some issues for Strasbourg fans, definitely, when BlueCo bought them. A lot of the ultras, do you know what I mean, the really, really hardcore fans, are still not really happy with all of their experienced players getting sold and being replaced with all these really young guys. And, obviously Omega is doing really well for them at the moment, but he looks like he's going to end up at Chelsea at the end of the season as well. So there is definitely still some issues there, but as long as it doesn't wholesale affect the fan culture, I am 100% for it, man. I'm 100% for it. And I think looking at somewhere, I mean, this isn't news, because since the multi-club model happened, they basically were pretty honest straight away. We were interested in somewhere in France, and they said we want a team in South America. You could do a lot worse than Santos, man. Do you know what I mean? And at the end of the day, like I say, I think, if we're going to create an army of Esteban Williams or create a really interesting training ground. No, not training ground. That's derogative of the Brazilian league, because one thing I've absolutely got to caveat all of this with is the top Brazilian teams are wicked, man. Look how much trouble they gave us in the Club World Cup with the difference in finances and stuff. Do you know what I mean? You know, Flamengo put us to the sword. Palmeiras gave us a really tough game. Even Botafogo, I think, beat PSG. Do you know what I mean? Which is absolutely mad when you think about it. So, you know, there are some really good teams over there, and it could be a great experience for some of our young players who are maybe a little bit coddled, not coddled, but it's just not like as intense, is it? And they're less likely to develop their footballing prowess. Do you know what I mean? And you know, in academy football, and going on loan to a championship team where they get 4 appearances in a season because they're not trusted enough because they're young or whatever. Over in Brazil, if we put them at Santos, much like we're seeing with Strasbourg right now, they'll play at the end of the day. So, yeah, really interesting. Guys, tell me what you think about this in the comments. Tell me how you feel about the multi-club model in general. I'm a massive nerd for this kind of stuff, right? I absolutely really like the idea of like building the club in interesting ways and trying to circumvent those things. I liked the idea of the loan army when we were doing it. We just didn't do it very well. Do you know what I mean? And ultimately, we ruined it for everyone. So is this a good way to circumvent what the current limitations with the loan system are? And is this going to help us in, like, with, you know, if we'd have loaned a few players out to, or sold a few players to somewhere like Strasbourg, for instance, or loaned a few players, maybe we would have been able to get Axel Disasi out, or maybe we might have been able to get Raheem Sterling out somewhere else because we wouldn't have taken up so many of our international loan spots at Chelsea. Guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are you for the BlueCo Chelsea empire, or do you think it's just too much and we should focus on our own team? Let me know what you think. And guys, do not forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I'm on the road to 1,886 at the time of recording, and I can taste it. I'm so close, and it is all because of you, you absolute bunch of legends. Nice one, guys. I hope you all have an absolutely wicked day. I'll catch up with you very, very soon. Take it easy. Peace.